How's everyone doing? Fair to middling, all right. Well, don't get too excited then. We want to go ahead and get started this evening. It's good to see you, and glad you guys are here. And if you're watching with us online tonight, we want to welcome you. So glad you're participating with us as we continue our study in the book of Judges. Last week, we finished up Judges chapter 16, so we finished up the story of Samson. We looked at Samson and Delilah in particular last week. And the story of Samson isn't quite the children's story we all were told when we were younger. There's a little more to it. But we finished that up last week, and we will start what really is these next few weeks as we wrap up the book of Judges. Kind of a separate section of the book. Judges has kind of got three sections to it. We've the longest section is got the stories we're all familiar with: Gideon, Samson, all those guys. Samson is the last one of those, and so chapter 17 through the end of the book is a little different section. It will have a different flair or different flavor to it as we get into it. So let's begin first with prayer, and then we will get started. Heavenly Father, we are grateful tonight to have a few moments to look into your word, to pray, to enjoy the study and to see what it is that your Spirit has to teach us through your living and active word. Guide us tonight and give us the wisdom from heaven. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So we are going tonight to look at, yes sir? A question, all right? Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, and this, so if you're online, didn't hear the question, and this was something we talked a little bit about last week. So Samson tells Delilah, back there in chapter 16, that if you shave his head, cut his hair off, that's when he'd be like anybody else. He'd just be like a normal person, no particular strength. Of course, he goes to sleep. Apparently, he's a very, very sound sleeper. She has all his hair cut off, and whether he's just waking up and doesn't realize his hair's cut off yet when he says this to himself, or whether he does and doesn't think it matters. And I think what we really kind of looked at last week, because he clearly knew what she was doing. He'd gone through this. He told her three different things. She had done all three of those things. He clearly knew what she was doing. And my personal take on what's happening with Samson there in chapter 16 is that if you look at what accounts we have through his life, he has, in some respects, kind of thumbed his nose multiple times at this covenant that God has with him as a Nazirite. He's touched dead things. He's eaten food out of dead things. He just several times treated both the Nazirite vow and God himself with disrespect. And every time he's done it, he's kind of, on the outside it would appear, he's been fine. He hadn't had any repercussions. I mean, he's touching dead things and breaking the Nazirite vow. Nothing happens to him. I think there came a point in Samson's life where he was so arrogant, thought he was getting away with stuff, had pretty much done whatever he wanted to do whenever he wanted to do it. I think he thought he was kind of, didn't matter what happened, he was going to be able to do what he wanted to do. That's kind of what I think was going on. And so we saw the warning there that, sometimes we think we can do the things that God wants us to do in our own strength, and because we think we've done other things before. And boy, the tragedy of that one right there, that God had left and he didn't even realize it. I don't know what's worse, that he didn't realize his strength was gone, or he didn't think it mattered. I don't know which one is worse. But of course, the real tragedy for us, or the real lesson for us, would be: do we try to serve the Lord? Do we try to do the things that God's called us to do and be as a church, and do it on our own strength as opposed to the Lord's strength? So, no, that's all right. So that's picking up from last week. That's all right. So we're going to jump in tonight to Judges 17. We're going to actually probably get through chapters 17 and 18 tonight. This is really all one story, just one lengthy account of something that's going on. It's kind of hard to chop it up into two because the story just kind of really flows from one to the next. So we're not going to read all of this, but we're going to begin this evening in Judges chapter 17. And let's just read this first few verses and we'll go from there. There was a man of the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Micah. He said to his mother, "The 1,100 pieces of silver which were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse in my hearing, behold, the silver is with me. I took it." His mother said, "Blessed be my son of the Lord." He then returned the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother, and his mother said, "I wholly dedicate the silver from my hand to the Lord for my son, to make a graven image and a molten image. Now therefore I will return them to you." So when he returned the silver to his mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave them to the silversmith, who made them into a graven image and a molten image, and they were in the house of Micah. And the man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and household idols, and consecrated one of his sons, that he might become his priest. So if we, let's keep on going here before we comment. In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. Now there was a young man from Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah, who was also a Levite, and he was staying there. The man departed from the city from Bethlehem in Judah to stay wherever he might find a place. And as he made his journey, he came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah. Micah said to him, "Where do you come from?" He said to him, "I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah. I'm going to stay wherever I might find a place." Micah then said to him, "Dwell with me and be a father and priest to me, and I will give you 10 pieces of silver a year, a suit of clothes, and your maintenance." So the Levite went in. The Levite agreed to live with the man, and the young man became to him like one of his sons. So Micah consecrated the Levite, and the young man became his priest and lived in the house of Micah. Then Micah said, "Now I know that the Lord will prosper me, seeing as I have a Levite as priest." All right. Now this is just the first half of the story, okay? So as we're reading this, what pops out to you of this story that sounds a little bit fishy or a little bit weird or a little bit odd? Okay, they're making idols here. All right, that's a fairly big don't. Now, what else? Anything seems somewhat contradictory. Okay, we're going to dedicate this money to the Lord by making an idol. The first thought is, someone seems really, really confused here. Now, we have talked off and on throughout the book of Judges that one of the things that we see here, that we see here again in verse 6, that everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes. That's kind of the theme of this book. And as we look through the book of Judges, we see all these accounts, and we've looked at all the big names, the Samsons and the Gideons, the Ehuds. We've seen all these stories, and we've seen all these people that God has raised up, and we've really seen that most of these guys are really not all that great. Nobody's going to be holding up Samson as a guy to imitate. I mean, he's big and strong, and God does some things through him, but in his own life, his own character was sketchy, to say the least. Gideon had some major faults, and I'm not talking about just putting the fleece out. I mean, Gideon had some real problems we see later on down the line. Jephthah, all these guys had major, major problems. They were not the type of people you would want to emulate as far as the way they seemed to live their lives in many ways. Well, what we get to in chapter 17 and these next few chapters in Judges is kind of We've looked at the, quote, heroes, so to speak, the big-time warriors and rescuers. Now we're taking a step back and we're looking at, for the next 4 or 5 chapters, kind of a snapshot of what everyday life was just kind of like in the area of Israel. These are normal, everyday, living through their lives type of folks. And so what we're going to see is, what's the normal Israelite like, as opposed to what Samson was like. And that's the story. So first of all, what we have here is we have this mom who apparently is fairly well off. Because we saw this a couple weeks ago when we looked at Samson. She has, our son Micah here has stolen 1,100 pieces of silver. Now, if you remember when they bribed Delilah back last week, the 5 chiefs of the Philistines each gave her 1,100 pieces of silver. That's a massive amount of money. It's just a reference here. When Micah hires the priest here in a few verses, how much does he pay him for the year? 10. So he steals 1,100 and he's paying the priest 10 pieces of silver annually to live on. Well, I mean, he's giving him some clothes and a place to live, but that's his salary. So, in other words, 1,100 is a lot. So take your annual salary, multiply it by 1,000, and there you go. That's what he stole. So these are pretty well-off folks, all things considered. Mom, though, apparently is not really happy that there's 1,100 pieces of silver missing, and apparently she has uttered a curse. And kind of the idea is there, she's kind of said something like, maybe the guy who stole this, I don't know. She places a curse on whoever it is. Well, apparently the curse kind of freaks out Junior. So Micah, her son, who appears to be a younger man, upon hearing how upset his mom is that he stole 1,100 pieces of silver, which seems like a no-brainer. Oh no, mom's mad. She's uttered a curse. I better give it back. So he gives it back. And mom says, oh, you gave the money back, son. Blessed are you of the Lord. Now, I'm trying to imagine what my mindset would be. If something like this happened, if one of my sons has stolen pretty much my life savings, and cool, brought it back, but there might be more than blessed are you of the Lord. There might be more than that going on there. But she just kind of goes the other direction, and it's almost like what she's really trying to do is reverse the curse. I mean, I'm trying to counterbalance what took place, what I said before. And then, as you pointed out, she's going to dedicate a portion of this money, the silver, to the Lord. And she's going to do that by making an idol. We don't have to think hard about that. We know that's wrong. That's just way out of bounds. So there is some definite confusion here on how to best worship God or to be faithful. I would say this, at least for me. I'm going to assume for the moment that mom has here sincerity in her heart. I think she's not trying to be a pagan. She's saying she wants to dedicate something to God, but she seems to be confused on how to go about doing that. So maybe she's sincere. Maybe she's trying to do the right thing, but she's going about doing the right thing in the right way. Well, clearly not. We're going to get back to that in a moment. So Micah Jr. here, not only does he get this idol for his house, but he goes and has a couple other ones. He has an ephod made, which is again kind of a chest piece. It's part of the vestments for a priest or someone like that to wear. He has some other idols made, some other images made as well, and he decides to get his son in on the act and make his son a priest. Because if you have a shrine, you have to have a priest. If you're going to you're going to make a place of worship, you have to have the worship leader. And so, again, this is assuming some knowledge here, but in ancient Israel, was just anybody supposed to be a priest? So were there certain people who were only allowed to be priests? Levites. Okay. So what we have here is we have a mom who's dedicating something to the Lord by making an idol. We have a non-Levite, just because he's in the family, being made the priest. And by the way, one more thing here. At this point in time in history, could you just set up a place of worship anywhere? Or was there a certain place you were supposed to worship God? Okay, at this point in time, Jerusalem's not there yet. There's a place called Shiloh. And Shiloh is where the tabernacle, the tent-type tabernacle that the people of Israel had, they'd set it up in a place called Shiloh. And you'll see even later on down the line that that's places like where Eli is at and Samuel. It's Shiloh. So what happens is you have worship of the Lord done through idol making. You've got it done. Micah just said, well, let's do it here instead of at Shiloh, and I'll just make my son the priest and not a Levite. So, and he thinks he's set up, or at least he's acting like he is, until an actual Levite shows up. Now, one of the things we know is happening here, why this guy's wandering around, is there's obviously more Levites than there are jobs at the tabernacle. So, one of the things they would do is that they would travel around and kind of look for a place to kind of set up shop and teach and kind of be used of the Lord. They wouldn't, not doing a temple or sacrifices or anything, but, traveling preachers, so to speak. And so he's going by. What he essentially says here is he's looking for a place to hang out and do his thing. And Micah says, you need a place, I need a priest. God's good. That's kind of the idea here. In fact, he goes so far as to say in verse 13, I know that the Lord will prosper me. I have a Levite as a priest. So we can look at Micah and we're going, wait a minute, you've got idols, you're in the wrong place. You had set up your son to be a priest. Okay, but now you got the Levite. And he thinks because he's got a Levite that makes that he's got idols in his own church, so to speak. God's going to prosper him. Now, is Micah just, maybe even his mom, are they simply ignoring God, have no knowledge of God, or don't even know God? Are they openly, intentionally defiant of God's law, or are they confused and misinformed and just don't know any better? Yep. They're probably sincerely worshiping God, but they are clearly putting God in among all the other gods, and just kind of having well, again, everybody around the people of Israel worship multiple gods, polytheism. And clearly, at this point in time in history, the book of Judges, the people of Israel have adopted that take. So it's not necessarily that they have denied the existence of God or that God's there, but they just added all these other small g gods around him. And they've adopted and began to incorporate the practices of the worship of Baal, and sometimes even the worship of gods like Molech or Dagon. All the gods of these groups of people around them, they've added and they've begun to mesh and intermingle and just come up with something kind of new. And by the time you get to chapter 17, this is the prevailing idea. And it's not just that there's even a big formal system out there. There's not a big formal system that everyone's doing. Everyone's kind of doing their own thing. Everyone essentially has their own personal religion. Every one of them is picking out the God they like, the one they want to do, the things they want to do, and we'll all do our own worship, to the point that Micah's even just putting up his own shrine and starting his own thing. He hires his own priest. Now, we haven't even gotten to the Levite yet. Of all the people who's supposed to know better, who should have known better than this? The Levite, the guy who's supposed to be a priest, the guy who's supposed to be trained in all this stuff. And he shows up and goes, "You want to hire me to be a priest for your idols? Salary? Cool, you got a deal." This is the spiritual state of Israel. Everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes. They kind of make up their own worship practices. They make up their own worship styles. They combine the worship of the true God with worship of other things, and they've just kind of blended it in however they want to. And it might be different from town to town, but they're all just kind of blending it in together. There's a word that's used for this. It's not necessarily a biblical word, it's a later word, but a word that we use for this today is called syncretism. Syncretism is the blending of two different belief systems or two different cultures. So you could have cultural syncretism. So two different cultures might come together, and the two cultures might begin to blend what they are, what makes them unique, and come up with something kind of new. And then religious syncretism is when you take two different faiths or two different belief systems and you begin to merge them and come up with a new practice. So a couple of easy examples. Everyone's heard of voodoo, but voodoo is like in Haiti and in the Caribbean. But voodoo is a religion that was come up with as people, as slaves and other groups from the Caribbean and from Africa blended African tribalism, animistic religions from the continent of Africa with Christianity. They blended the two ideas, and you end up later on with voodoo. There's another Caribbean religion called Santeria. It's the same idea. You take some tribal stuff and you blend it with some Christianity, and you that's where it kind of came from. We see this type of thing that's happened throughout history in quite a bit. Syncretism. And what the people of Israel are doing, it's not necessarily that they're just denying that God exists. It's that they are blending and taking the worship of Yahweh and blending it with the worship of other gods and coming up with their own thing and doing whatever they want to do. That's where Israel is at. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in just a moment. Judges 18. Because this is only part of the story. So again, chapter 18, verse 1, he says, again, this is the second time our narrator says this. In those days, there was no king in Israel. And in those days, the tribe of the Danites, by the way, Samson was from the tribe of Dan as well, were seeking an inheritance for themselves to live in, for until that day, an inheritance had not been allotted to them as a possession among the tribes of Israel. And by the way, if we were to go back to Judges chapter 1, we would find out that all the 12 tribes had been assigned certain areas that were kind of theirs, and they were each supposed to go on their own, kind of conquer the people from that area and take possession of whatever area had been assigned to them. Well, the tribe of Dan had tried to do that, and they got whooped on in Judges chapter 1. And so they ended up kind of as nomads for a little bit in the hill country between Ephraim and Judah, just kind of wandering around but not having a real home. So you have a group of them who say, "Listen, we're tired of doing this. We're going to go conquer someplace and get a home." So they send out 5 scouts. This tribe of Dan. I'm going to kind of skip past some of this stuff. They send out 5 scouts. And these 5 scouts run across Micah's place. And they meet this Levite priest. And they ask him, well, is what we're going to do be successful? And let me just read this to you. He says, verse 6 of this chapter, he says, "Go in peace, your way which you're going." Some translations have the Lord's approval. What he's really literally saying is, go your way, the Lord sees you. Now, they apparently take that as a blessing. Now, if I just tell you God sees you, that doesn't necessarily mean he approves. It just means he sees. It's a classic answer of someone who doesn't really have an answer. You can interpret it as negative or positive or just neutral. So these 5 scouts from Dan, they see the shrine, they see the priest at Micah's house. They say, are we going to be successful? He says, God sees you. They take it to be positive. They scout out this town and decide that's a good place to try to conquer. And they go back home and say, we've got ourselves a good place. And they basically, here's what they basically will say. This is a people that technically belong in an area that's controlled by the area, a city called Sidon. It's a coastal area. Sidon and Tyre kind of are always joined together. And this is the area that's under control of Sidon. But they're on the outskirts of that area. It's profitable. Everyone there is, they're content. They're happy. They don't have any soldiers. They're just living on their own. They're kind of a long ways from any place else. They're successful. They're isolated. It's a perfect target. And so 600 men from Dan are now on their way, based upon the advice of these 5 scouts, on their way to this town to conquer it. And they run by Micah's house. Now there's not just 5, though. Now there's 600. Now, when they get out there, they come up to Micah, verse 18, chapter 18, verse 18. When that's all these men, went to Micah's house, they took the graven image, they took the ephod, and they took the household idols and the molten image, and the priest said to them, what are you doing? They said to him, be quiet, or be silent. Shut up, is what they said. They said, be silent, put your hand over your mouth, and come with us, and be to us a father and a priest. Is it better for you to be priest to the house of one man, or to be priest to a tribe and a family in Israel? The priest's heart was glad. And he took the ephod and household idols and the graven image and went among the people. They turned and departed and put the little ones and the livestock and the valuables in front of them. And when they had gone some distance from the house of Micah, the men who were in their houses near Micah's house assembled and overtook the sons of Dan. They cried out to the sons of Dan, who turned around and said to Micah, what's the matter with you that you've assembled together? He said, you've taken away my gods, which I made, and the priests that have gone away, and what do I have besides? How can you say to me, what's the matter with you? Sons of Dan said to him, do not let your voice be heard among us, or else fierce men will fall upon you, and you'll lose your life with the lives of your household. So the sons of Dan went on their way, and when Micah saw they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his house. So these 5 scouts had stopped there earlier. Now they've gone back. They've got the army. They're coming back through there. And they go, oh yeah, this is the place where we stopped and got some good advice earlier. Let's take that. We like that priest. We like his idols. They've helped us out. Let's take them. So they just basically rob Micah, and they tell the priest, hey, listen, there's a lot more of us than there is of Micah. Why don't you come with us? It's a promotion. There's more of us. You're going to live even better. And he goes, I'm in. Micah shows up and goes, what are you guys doing to me? They basically say, shut up. We're taking your stuff. What are you going to do about it? And he goes, okay. And that's the abridged Brett translation right there. And they head on their way. Now, there's a couple interesting things here to be said. Look at what Micah says here. He says, you've taken away my gods, which I made. How powerful could a God you make be? If God's God, can you take him away anywhere? Can you force God to go anywhere? And if you made him, is he really worth praying to? I mean, do you see all the foolishness going on here? Micah is completely unaware of how stupid he sounds, I think. Now, the truth is, Micah's not unusual. That this practice has gone on for centuries and all over parts of the world. But Micah's upset because these guys robbed him of his gods. What's he going to do now? He's godless. That's how he sees it. So we see that not only are they confused, while they may be aware of the true God, Yahweh, his understanding of who God or gods are and what they can do is so confused and weak and misinformed that he's afraid of these guys, and he thinks they can take his gods away because he thinks he can make these things. So now we can look at this very easily and say, well, this is a very, very misinformed, confused situation. One more thing we see here, I didn't read it, but there's a third time in here it says in chapter 18 that there was no king in Israel. It says that 3 times throughout this story. And there seems to be the implication, if you're writing a story about people who are failing in their understanding of who God is, and you're seeing a story about real confusion and real spiritual problems, and you keep saying, by the way, there's no king, what seems to be the implication there? What's the author trying to tell us? A king would make this better. Okay? And, of course, Judges immediately precedes the book of 1 Samuel in a calendar sense. And we know that by the end of Samuel, you've got King Saul and eventually King David. And I guess if you were in King David's time, you might be thinking this. Hey, the right king will solve all this. Now, if we were to look past the era of King David and King Solomon, and we see the rest of the history of Israel with all those kings, do those kings solve the problem of spiritual idolatry? No. In fact, maybe made it worse. So maybe this is saying that, but ultimately, Samuel will object in 1 Samuel. He will object to the people of Israel's attempt and desire to have a king. Why does he do that? They already had a king. And who was the true king of Israel? The one true God. I think there's a double meaning here. And the more profound meaning is this. Everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes. There's no king in Israel. There's no acknowledgement that God is God and He is king. That's the real problem. Even when there will later be a physical king, they still haven't done a good job of acknowledging who God is. And so the real issue here is that they are not acknowledging the true king while everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes. And the reality that ends up then with this spiritual blender of gunk that is Israel. And what they're doing is their answer to all this is this idea of syncretism. This idea of blending. If I don't know for sure, I just blend stuff. I put it together and I come up with my own belief system. Let me suggest that that's something that's pretty popular today. Now, before we get too high and mighty here, before we look out at our culture, before we look out at the world out there, before we look out at what's on television or what's in our music or what people believe or all the different faiths that are out there, before we look out at all that, before we look at all of them and go, look how you guys have messed this thing up. Israel is the people of God. Who are the people of God today? The church. Not the broader culture, the church. So ultimately, this is a message first and foremost directed to the people of God. So the question would be this for us tonight, is have we, or do we, or have we from time to time as Christians, as those who have chosen to follow God, are we ever guilty of this? Are we ever guilty of taking culture, ideas from other belief systems, other values, whatever it might be, and blending them with what the Bible has to say, and coming up with something just a little bit different? It'd be nice to say no, but what's that? Yes, it started in the homes. And so the question for us this evening is, have we done this? Even if we haven't done it to the extreme that they seem to have done it, At least by our eyes, we wouldn't think we have. They probably didn't think they had either. It's a question that we sometimes need to look at from time to time. Now, I will say this, it's easy to do this. I've had a chance to travel and to meet believers and to travel to different parts of the world, and it's easy to go to a different country and go, oh yeah, you guys have messed this up. It's a lot harder to recognize that when it's the world you've been raised in. So here's a question for you. We can get into a little discussion about this if you want to tonight. Here's the question. Have we, and since we're in the United States, we'll say American Christians, have we as American Christians ever, or are we currently sometimes blending things that are not from Scripture, wherever they may be from our culture, from our political system, from our value system in the West and the American culture? Have we taken those things and brought them into the church and improperly mixed them with the worship of God? Okay. Mm-hmm. Yep. So he's talking about the Sermon on the Mount, and make sure that we go back to the teachings of the Scripture and teachings of Christ, like the Sermon on the Mount, for example, and make sure that we're adhering to that we're listening to the Word of God. Now, I know that's our intention, and I'm not saying we don't do that. I'm not saying that we are doing this. I'm just asking the question, because I think it's important for us to try to make sure that we aren't sometimes giving divine biblical weight to things that aren't necessarily that. Do any churches ever have the issue of taking things that really aren't particularly, maybe they were good things that we do or practice, and making them biblical when they really aren't biblical? Not necessarily bad things. Do we sometimes elevate parts of what we do in church and I think I mentioned this a couple weeks ago as an example. One church I served at had a gazebo, a prayer garden out in their front part of the property. They needed to expand. They needed to move. They needed to do some things with that property, and they went to remove that gazebo, and people got upset because someone had donated that gazebo, 30 years or whatever it was before that, and they ended up not doing anything. They ended up hurting them. They ended up hurting the growth of the church because they wouldn't move a gazebo to a different part of the property, because that gazebo had attained some type of divine, I don't want to overstate it, but it attained some kind of big-time status that was outsized. It was keeping them from being obedient to what they needed to move it. Now, gazebos are not particularly bad or good one way or the other. They're not, it's not a theological issue here. Do we sometimes take things and make them more than they are? And I was at a church one time when we were going to, a stained glass window got covered up, and somebody said, as long as that stained glass window is covered up, the Spirit of God's not in here and I can't worship. I'm not making that up. That's pretty much a quote. Now, what does that say about the place of stained glass windows and work? I like stained glass windows are pretty. I like stained glass windows. I'm not trying to bash on stained glass windows. But what does it say where that person's at as far as how they worship? Have they brought something else into worship besides the Spirit of God and the Word of God? Probably. Now, these are easy ones. These are the easy ones. Let me ask questions like this. And if we're not comfortable answering these questions, just think about them. Are there parts of our American historical values as a culture that might not be as biblical as we think they are? And if so, what are they? Doesn't mean those values don't have a place. I'm just asking, do those values sometimes have a place in the worship of God? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So talking about. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's some things written down as a country. There's some things written down in our founding documents that we haven't lived up to. Okay. But this actually gets to the real question I want to ask. I'm going to get myself in trouble here. I'm just asking questions. Angel's going, don't do it. I'm sorry, what was that again? Okay. All right. So let me just food for thought here. A couple things. There's no doubt that Christianity and biblical values played a huge role in the founding of our country. That the men who wrote those documents, the men who formed those initial governments, who led all those things, many of them were Christians. Many of them were deists who believed in the Bible. What we about think is the Old Testament. They believed in God and the Bible. They didn't just believe in Jesus Christ as the Son of God, but they believed in that biblical morality and value system. But let me ask you this. Is the United States as a nation equivalent to ancient Israel in the sense that they are the called out people of God? No. Do we sometimes act like it? I'm really not trying to pick a fight here. I do want us to evaluate those sometimes. I've grown up in the South. Love my country, do what I can for all that type of deal. But the United States as a nation is not the same thing as the people of God. You don't have to be an American to be a Christian. And to be Christian is not to be American. In fact, the majority of Christians throughout the majority of history, the majority of Christians right now on the earth are not in this country. In fact, we're seeing that the fastest outgrowth, the biggest growing revivals and outbreaks of Christianity right now are not in North America. They're in places like China. They're in places like Southeast Asia. They're in places like South America. They're in the Middle East. They're in places like Iran and Iraq. We have to be careful that we don't equate patriotism with Christianity. I'm not saying Christians shouldn't be patriots. Please do not misunderstand me. Okay? Christians, I think, should be patriots. We should love our nation. We should seek the best for our nation at all times. But Christianity and patriotism aren't identical. And by that I mean this. We have to be careful. If we were to, you mentioned freedom. What are some of those traditional American iconic values that the nation is kind of known for? I mean, if people talk about America, what are some of those values, or what's America known for? Okay, we've already kind of established liberty, freedom, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's right there in the founding documents. What else? Free enterprise, capitalism. Okay. Freedom of speech. Are we as a nation, even like that rugged individualism, pick yourself up by your bootstraps type of an idea, self-made, whatever. Is that part of the American? It used to be. Okay. So let me ask you this. Is the idea of a self-made, prosperous individual part of the biblical church and worship? Is that an understanding that God brings into how we're supposed to do church? What happens if I bring that into church? Okay. Yeah. Now. Yeah. So we're not saying you shouldn't go out there and work hard and make a go of it. I'm not saying that. But if we bring that idea into the church, into the worship of God, what have we done? Yeah. I'm a good person. I'm moral. You're not. I'm better than you. Yes. Mm-hmm. So if y'all don't hear it, if you didn't hear that, he's talking about the value of humility, and that sometimes American values are actually elevating pride over humility. Now, again, nothing wrong with being proud of our nation. I'm not talking about being anti-patriotic. I'm not talking about all that stuff. But if we're not careful, we can take some of these hard work, self-made, individual pride, and all these things, and if we bring those into the church as the worship of God, what do? We distort who God is, who we are, and we distort the worship of God. God's telling us that we can't do it on our own, that we have to, in fact, be completely and utterly dependent upon Him. We can't save ourselves. So if we're not careful, we can take one value that might have a good place over here, but we can take it and mesh it in with something over here. Syncretism. And it can happen without us even realizing it. That's just one area. I'm not trying to bang on our country. I'm really not. What I'm trying to point out is that sometimes if we can, without even realizing it, take the world's values, even sometimes that might have a place over here, and we can bring them into the worship of God and distort God's truth. This is what's going on in Israel's day. This is what's going on in the era of the judges. Now, we will look at ourselves, we're not bringing idols into worship. Well, we may not be bringing statues, but we might be bringing idols. We don't give them names. We may not call it Baal. Are there things that we value very highly that we want God to give us, and that we think we're really? Well, I want to pick an easy one here. Prosperity gospel, where I bring in the idea that to be successful, if I'm really godly, if I'm really successful, I will have lots of stuff. If I have enough faith, if I do this and this, I get stuff. And really what happens is the worship of God is really substitute for the worship of money. God's a means to an end. And we've talked about this before too in Genesis and all these other places. The worship of the gods in Micah's day, they have these gods there so they can get what they want. We want God to give us that victory over that city. We want God to give us crops. We want God to give us a big family, so we establish these rituals as a way of getting from God what we want. And God says, no. You worship me because I'm God. Not because I'm an ATM machine up here in heaven giving you what you want. Yeah, I have no doubt. Yeah, I have no doubt about that. And let's be honest, being saved by what we do, that's all over the place. And It's in every other religion on the face of the earth. I don't care where it's at or where it's from. That's the basis of the religion. You can pick Hinduism, Islam, whatever it is. It's essentially works-based. If I do this, I get this. And unfortunately, some Christians have brought that into Christianity. That's a great example of that. And what happens is, well, now if I'm good because of what I've done, if I'm in good shape with God because of what I've done, now I can be proud. Now I can take credit for what's happened to me, and now I can look down at somebody else who's not quite as righteous as I am. What? Yeah. Now, I will say this, though. That being said, I think, at least initially, I think the mom in the story is probably sincere. I think she's actually wanting to dedicate something to God. But her worship is so confused and skewed that sometimes being sincere isn't always enough. If I have a if I want to go take a flight and I pick the wrong plane, I can have all the faith and sincerity in that plane I want to. But if there's no gas in the engine, or if it hasn't been maintained, there's a good chance that what happens? Maybe it won't even get off the ground, but even if it gets off the ground, what may happen to me? Yeah, I might get halfway. Now, I might be sincere, but I could be sincerely wrong too. So God does weigh our motives, yes. But just because I have sincere motives in and of itself doesn't necessarily mean if I'm sincerely about trusting the wrong thing. So the main point of really all this is tonight is just to make us ask some questions. I'm really not trying to pick on any one thing necessarily. I just want us to ask the question, do we sometimes bring in to the worship of God, into our relationship with God, things that God did not intend, that can confuse, misinform, maybe even cause us to worship someone other than we thought we were worshiping? It's just a question. Yeah.
I think, to me, when you read it out of this story, it's a lot more obvious than to us today. When he says, I'm going to buy my own self a priest,
Mm-hmm.
right? You think, well, okay, that was a long time ago. We'd never do that. But yet, sometimes I think we get caught up in the perfect attendance and regular tithing. And it's sort of a parallel to I'm buying myself a priest, and God has to honor that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here every time. I pay my tithes. I've done what I had to do.
Okay. And you're right. If I check off the list here of things I'm supposed to do, I've kind of like bought myself a priest. Let me take that a step further. And this is perhaps more available today than it has been at any point in time in history. We're not necessarily buying ourselves a priest, but I got 20 guys on TV and I can pick the one I like. I can pick the guy on TV that tells me what I want to hear, that validates my choices. Or, if I'm really ambitious, I could go church shopping until I find the church that tells me what I want to hear and makes me feel like I want to feel. And the moment they don't, I go buy a different priest. Now, that stepped on some toes, I know. Because church is not Walmart. Church is a family of it's a family, it's a fellowship of believers that God brings you into to walk beside and to make his name known alongside with. That's what church is. It's not ultimately about getting the songs you want or the feelings you want to feel. It's about being in a place that makes disciples and teaches the Scripture and glorifies God in the process, and glorifies God as its goal. We have to be careful that just because someone hurt my feelings or the preacher says something I didn't like or I didn't like that song, I don't just go buy another priest. And we can find one on TV. We can find one down the road. Okay, now that I've stomped on everyone's toes. We're going to wrap that up tonight. and I'm sure we've hurt someone. I'm sure we've offended somebody somewhere. So, well, yeah, we'll try harder next week. So, if you've been watching with us online, I'm so glad you guys are here. Next week we'll be in Judges chapter 19. We're probably about 3 weeks away from starting the book of Revelation on Wednesday night. So just kind of give you a heads up on that. Once we finish Judges, we'll be starting on a look at the book of Revelation on Wednesday. So if you're watching online, glad you're here. You guys have a great evening, and we're going to take some time here to pray.